Hello and welcome everyone. Take your virtual seats. It's great to have you with us today. I am mindful of everyone's time. It is Tuesday the 3rd of June. I must admit, I looked at my calendar on Sunday and I saw 1st of June. I thought, that means we're nearly at 1st of July. So I'm going to make a swift start to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. This is the 5th webinar in our series. We're almost there, where we're here to support you with the strengthened standards. And today we're unpacking governance responsibilities. And hopefully, I'm confidently able to say that we want to do so in a really practical way. We're going to explore what's changing, what good looks like, and share some frameworks and examples and some tools that you can bring to your organisation and hopefully use immediately. So welcome. And before we get started, I would just like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and the Noongar people, the traditional custodians on the lands that Mark and I, your hosts, are joining from today. And of course, pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledging their ongoing custodianship of the country and their leadership that continues to care and shape the practices where we work and live. So for those of you who don't know, I'm an intensive care nurse. So I'm doing a real pulse check, real live pulse check with you. How you're going? It's a month to go. Is that scary? Is it exciting? Is it a relief? Speak up and let us know how you're doing. If there's any governing body and board members that want to pop in the chat how you specifically are doing, we would love to hear from you. Introduce yourself and share how your organisation is going. While you do that, I'll just do a tiny bit of housekeeping. As you can see, you've got the chat box there. Pop any questions in and we'll answer as we go. This session is being recorded and we'll send the link out within about 48 hours so that you can rewatch it or share it. And there's a tool that we provide at the end. We'll also make sure that that's attached to the email. Okay, it is my pleasure to introduce, there's one co-presenter today, and that is Mark Sheldon-Stem. Hopefully you joined us for the first webinar in this series, and Mark is a familiar face. He is a familiar face to many in the aged care world anyway, but Mark is a seasoned aged care advisor with nearly 30 years experience, including as CEO, and was president of the Aged Care and Community Services of Tasmania, but he specialises in consumer-directed care and strategic planning, supporting over 40 providers through this reform. He's a fellow of the Institute of Public Accountants and brings a master's in strategic foresight. So very much financial stewardship and future-focused expertise to aged care governance. Myself, I have a new title, as some of our astute learners here with us may notice. Really excited to introduce, to let you know that I've taken on the role of Head of Learning and Capability here at AusMed. I'll be leading this strategy and working closely with many of you, I'm sure, and our team to really build workforce capability through some responsive and strategic initiatives. So I will still be a face around the traps on these webinars, and but hopefully build much closer relationships to many of you. We also have, not with us today, as she's probably sunning herself on a beach right now, but Dr. Karen Patterson, our Chief Nursing Officer, really supported with development of these slides. She's not joining us because she's having some much deserved R&R, but she brings extensive clinical excellence and health service leadership and management experience. And Karen also knows a thing or two about being a board member, as you might imagine. She's a fellow of the Australasian College of Health Service Management. So we have her insights shaping today's session. She's just not present and joining us. And of course, our wonderful Chief Customer Officer, Michelle Wickie, is here. She will be available for support with any questions during the session. So say hello to Michelle and type away. Here's our agenda, 4 parts. First up, we've got Mark, who will explain what boards must know, ask and receive. We will then very briefly touch on some of the new responsibilities under the Act. but then really use the opportunity today to look at how we can reframe governance for not just being a compliance responsibility, but an opportunity to build capability and finish off with some of those practical tools, tips, and takeaways that I mentioned. But for now, welcome back, Mark. How are you? Great to have you here.
Good. Thanks, Zoe. How are you?
I am very well. Tell us, how are you? What's happening in your world at the moment?
I'm here and extremely busy. People asking questions continually about how do I prepare for 1st of July and across the three realms, residential, home care and new standards. And then, of course, with home care, there's also the support home program. So, yeah, a lot of questions, still a number of unanswered at the moment, but I think come the 1st of July, we'll have a lot of it in place.
Absolutely. So, what's the main question? If you could summarize, what are you hearing most, or what's the biggest sort of unanswered question that you're seeing most at the moment?
I think for residential care is how do we ensure we actually meet the standards? That's a big question, and I think that's an issue for people in terms of how they do prepare and make sure. And I know we put out a tool to allow people to sort of gather the evidence for that. In home care, it's just how home care supported home is going to work. I mean, it's right from the actual delivery of services and then the funding and how the funding is going to work. And yeah, there's a bit of an unknown. I had a client on this morning that basically I said, look, you're just going to have to ride it out in July and August and just see how the systems work. Hopefully they do. So we'll have to just monitor. I think July, August, September is going to be a pretty rough ride for a lot of people, but hopefully the systems will settle down after that. Yeah.
Agree. Thanks, Mark, for your insights. And you actually we published an article, was it last week or the week before, that you wrote specifically on supporting those conversations with any support at home clients where you need to navigate those new costing conversations. So
Yeah,
that
that's
was
right. Yeah,
that's a big question as well that are on people's minds.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's a process that you need to go through to protect yourselves and also protect the clients. Because now that before, I mean, it was a basic daily fee before that nobody paid, and now consumers are going to be asked to pay the money. So having those processes in place, and of course the other bit that comes into that is that home care providers will now be dealing with Services Australia and Centrelink, and that's going to be an issue in terms of just what the response is from them. Many of the residential providers online at the moment will know that dealing with Services Australia is not an easy task. So we're interested to see how this whole thing rolls out for support at home. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's a lot of questions, but appreciate your insights, Mark. All right, shall we kick off? Take it away, Mark.
Yeah.
Here.
Okay. So the first slide here is there's no grace period. I mean, all of you will have received your deeming notices, and to surprise, quite a lot of providers who were probably going to be up for accreditation in this next 6 months of the new system have found that they've got probably 18 months to actually prepare for the what's now called a re-registration rather than accreditation. So I think there's been a huge sigh of relief. I've heard around the country saying, "Oh, thank God, it's not this August or September, October." However, be aware that don't be caught, because that is a fallacy. There's no grace period in this. So what's going to happen is, and I know the Commission at the moment is issuing quite a few non-compliance notices to providers across a number of areas that we need to meet, and it may be all the way from RN minutes to care minutes to requirements of RADs and the new liquidity requirements they're issuing non. So what they're doing is they're now looking at risk, and if you happen to come up on the risk level of a particular point, then the commission is going to come to visit you. Now, they may visit you about that particular point, but be aware they'll expect you to be up to speed as far as the new standards are concerned. So they'll want to see some very clear indication that you've done your training, that you've implemented new standards, and you're working along and gathering the evidence to make sure you can show them that you're actually meeting the new standards. Okay, so there's always going to be a risk, and never think that, oh well, registration's only 18 months, 2 years away, I don't really have to worry about it. Well, be worried, because it's something you really need to be on top of. So yeah, just prepare yourself. Next slide, thanks. Sorry. Okay, so let's talk about the board, because this is about the governance. And there's a couple of things about boards, whether it be a not-for-profit or for-profit organisation, doesn't matter. Board members aren't on the floor. They don't see what happens on a day-to-day basis. They often get feedback from families, or perhaps people that they may have in the facility that they hear things about. So it's going to be really important that when they meet, whether the boards meet monthly or bi-monthly or even quarterly, that the information that they receive is going to be able to allow them to understand what's occurring within the facility. Okay, so they play a key role. If you look at the new standards, there's a heavy emphasis on the governing body partnering with the residents and the families, and basically across the whole organisation. So in fact, they are well and truly across what's happening as far as the facility is concerned. And the commission, I know the commission will hold them responsible. And you're also aware that there is still whilst the criminal consequences of actions have been taken away, there are civil um, consequences still sitting in the Act. So therefore, if something does go terribly wrong, then the board members and also management could be up for civil charges. So it really has to be, the board has to be much more aware of what's occurring in terms of making sure they meet the standards and so on. So how does the actual management of the organization then feed that information to the board, so the board then feels comfortable that what's happening on the floor does actually represent a real reflection of the standards and how you're delivering care, whether it be in residential care or home care, it doesn't matter. And you'll know that as far as home care is concerned, QI data is being introduced, so there's going to be quality indicators and so on that the Commission's going to be hunting down as far as looking at risk. So really important. So next slide, thanks, Zoe. So let's talk about the practical part of this. So I've got here 3 parts. Effectively, there's a preparation, there's a coaching, and then there's a reporting. Okay, so the preparation is understanding the standards and the requirements of the outcomes, okay, and performance against these. Now, a lot of people have said to me, oh yes, we've read the standards and we're pretty much okay with those. We can tick the boxes, we think we do them. Don't be fooled, please. That's the reason why we actually developed that audit tool of evidence, because that is the evidence that the commission is going to want from you to show that you are in fact meeting the standards. So you might think you're meeting the standards, but having been through dozens of audits with a commission, I know that they turn up and they're going to ask that question that you were not prepared for and you don't have evidence for. And you thought you met that particular part of the standard, but suddenly the assessors are questioning you, saying, well, where's your evidence on this? Where's your evidence on that? And so on. So this is critical for you in terms of understanding exactly how things work, whether it be for home care. And we know that in home care, there's 279 subsets of the standards, even though there's only basically 5 for home care, there's still 72. And for the 7 for residential care, there's 327 subsets you must meet. So going through and thinking that you meet each of those on your own is not what the commission's going to expect. So you got to understand the commission is the governing body. They're the ones that are going to determine as to whether you're going to on strong or not. Next part is coaching, and I've been doing this for a number of providers across Australia, as well as for my own board here, where I'm looking after an organisation, is basically going through each of the standards and the evidence and coaching them on that particular exercise. And what I mean by coaching is going through that the evidence and the questions that the commission is effectively going to seek or ask of the board, and to see whether in fact the board is aware of, well, what systems do you use? Okay, in an incident management system, how does that work? How do you know that if an incident occurs within your operation, how do you know that processes are being followed properly and the outcomes are there? You've got open disclosure and so on. So the board needs to be able to answer that. The only way that you can do that is management has to coach the board. Now, a lot of boards, particularly not-for-profit boards, a lot of the board members are volunteers and get paid. They turn up once a month or every second month, and basically there to look after. Well, I know that having worked for many boards and been on other boards, that some board members think, oh yeah, I read the board report the night before. We're all pretty good, we're happy. You don't want them to get the shock if the commission turns up and suddenly says, well, you're not meeting this, and they start asking you as board members these sorts of questions that, well, hang on, we weren't aware of those questions. So it's really important that the coaching goes on. The third part is reporting. It is important that the board receives reports, and I know that Zoe will be putting out a template for your reporting to the board. Those reports have to address the outcomes of the governing body. All right, I will deal with that more in the next slide. But the point is the feedback from management about what is happening and how it's working and what issues are occurring within the facility, so that the board is well and truly across what's occurring and if there's no surprises. All right. I mean, a famous old line of a chairman said to me one time is, I don't mind bad news. I don't want surprises. Right. Don't allow there to be surprises. So that's really important, and we'll be going through in terms of that board part. So we're right for the next slide. Sorry. Thank you. Okay. So let's talk about what an active partnership looks like in terms of the board being involved. So what I've done here is I've gone through, and this is from the Commission's website and material, is effectively looked at the various standards. Standard 2 is the organisational standard, and in there it has some very clear outcomes that the board must be across, the governing board must be across. One example is, and I'll just read for you, and obviously I've got it in front of me: meaningful and active partnership with individuals, inform organisational priorities, and improve the quality of care and services. So how does a board, and this all comes back to the coaching part as well, how does the board then make sure that in fact it has meaningful and active partnerships? And what I'm suggesting there is, one is obviously the Consumer Governance Committee, which you're all required to have. So you're getting feedback, and that has to come to the board. You have feedback and surveys of residents on a regular basis, whether they be internal or external, and you know that they come and do the external ones on a regular basis in terms of the experience of your residents or families. And then finally, there's the residents and family representative meetings, in terms of if you have a general meeting with your residents and families, of feedback from that. So that material needs to be reported. In some cases, the board members may be involved in some parts of those, others they may not be, but they should be receiving a report. You should be receiving reports back on exactly how that what is a feel. What are the feelings of the residents and their families towards the care and services they're receiving? Another example is the governing body leads a culture of safety, inclusion, quality with a focus on continuous improvement, which embraces diversity, prioritizes the right, safety, health, and quality of life for the individual and the workforce. So how does the board actually know that that sort of stuff is actually happening? Well, obviously, as I said, of your philosophy. So obviously you have an organization philosophy, which is your mission and vision, which you effectively want to instill in the organizations as how care and services should be provided, right? Hopefully you've got subcommittees of human resources and clinical governance and quality of the board subcommittees, and this is where board members get to meet on perhaps a bi-monthly or quarterly basis, and actually go through with the management exactly how we're going with the human resources, workforce, and the clinical governance. Then there's these committees obviously report to the board on the culture. And also have a model of care. Talk about to particularly as I'm talking to your board members now, ask the management as to what's your model of care in terms of how are you delivering. Show me how you're actually partnering with the actual clients and residents that you have. And we know that particularly the one which we're all going to struggle on, I know, is standard 6 and food, because residents, particularly in residential care, if I go to my aged care and have a look at all the results of surveys on food, it's always about 50-50. 50% of people love it, and 50% of people say, "Oh, no, not really." So, look, it's going to be a really interesting one in terms of how you go with that. But that sort of feedback is important for the board to understand exactly where it sits, because you'll be asked questions by the commission about, well, how do you know how you're going with that particular standard, right? And obviously, the last one is continuous improvement. There's a huge emphasis on the new standards on continuous improvement, and you have to show not only that you've identified issues, you have the continuous improvement plan in place, and you're actually delivering on those continuous improvements. It's not just a list that you have generally, oh, well, yes, we're looking at this sort of stuff and we're just trying to move forward with it and so on. I'll give you a third example, is an outcome, which is the governing body is accountable for the delivery of quality care. This is the board is responsible for the delivery of quality care and service and maintains oversight of all aspects of the organisation. The provider's quality system enables the organisation performance and continuous improvement, which means that the board is the group that is ultimately responsible for the care and services delivered. Even though you can hold your managers accountable for what happens on the floor and what happens on a day-to-day basis, at the end of the day, the governing body carries the can. So you have to know. So what do you need to know? You need to know basically what the model of care that you're providing and the delivery of services and what's happening with that. And as said, in the template that Zoe will send out afterwards, there'll be some examples of what the board should receive from management to assure them that that's being met. You receive regular reports from management, obviously, about quality indicators, and I know that you're required to report those every quarter. However, you should be getting these at every board meeting. So they should be telling you, falls, pressure injuries, restricted practices, medication errors, all the basically those key components. You should effectively, the board should be getting that report, and they should be tracking to see that there's some improvement in those, because no doubt the commission will be tracking those as well. And if you're not performing or not improving on those, you're going to come up on the risk list for the commission, and they're going to turn up in your front door. Okay. Performance measured against quality indicators and consumer committees also. So those consumer committees, which is the general consumer one, and the quality one, which is of course also external, and they have to have representatives from outside, whether they be residents and or families or representatives. They need to also have those reports as well. So they're just examples of exactly what you need to have as a board member, in terms of the management telling you just how they're going and what's happening with the service. Okay. So let's go to the next one. Sorry. What outcomes will be audited? Okay, so we put an audited readiness tool out to you sometime after the last webinar, I think it was, or the webinar before, in terms of taking all of what the commission has as mapping evidence. And this is the evidence that they require you to have when effectively they come and knock on the door. Now, this is going to happen in two parts. If you look at the actual process the commission's put out, they're officially going to ask you to let you know that there's a re-registration coming up. Then they're going to ask you for material, and then they're going to ask you questions about that material, and then they're going to basically rock up at your doorstep and start checking some of that material, and also require other information to be acquired as well. And then obviously there's a close-off period in terms of similar to what we had for accreditation in terms of feedback and so on. So the tool identifies nearly 1,200 pieces of evidence that for residential, and it's nearly 1,000 pieces for home care, that you need to effectively have answers for, either as a governing body, a management body, or your workforce. And it's important, and talked about this before, you also coach your workforce. You need to coach your workforce on this evidence so that when they are actually asked those questions by the assessors, then effectively they can give answers which are up to date, sensible, and required. Okay. So let's have a look at the next one. Okay. Let's talk about the basis in terms of coaching. So what we've done here is effectively look at the mapping evidence, which is from the tool, the audit tool, and actually sitting with the board on a regular basis and going through those questions which the commission is expecting you to answer as board members. Now, though a lot of the answers are going to be held by management who run the systems. So the board members have to be able to understand exactly what systems use for what purpose. So what clinical care system do you use? Okay. What particular system do you use for feedback? What system are you using for care notes and so on? Okay. What's your rostering system? What's your payroll system? All those types of systems are going to be required for you to understand exactly how it's working and what's working. Okay. So remember, with the new act and new standards, all about person-centered user rights and so on. Okay. What's your complaints process? So what's the number of complaints you're receiving? How are the complaints being dealt with? Have there been any complaints that have been raised with the commission and you've had to deal with it? How are your clinical systems working? And how skilled, because there's also a fairly big emphasis in terms of what the commission wants is your workforce skilled? Do they have the necessary skills to carry out their duties as such? Okay. Yeah. How do you assure itself? The board assures itself by getting reports from the management that cover off those critical areas of outcomes. And I said there will be a template put out. Okay, reporting, make sure that, and I always say in terms of there's really two real characteristics a board member has to have is they have to basically spot something which is not entirely true or may not match. And they also have to give rigor. So they basically have to effectively say, hey, please explain more of this. Right? Don't be caught out as such. So it is what is called a multi-dimensional process. And that's where the reporting from management, and there should be a separate part in your board report, which is simply just compliance, which gives the board that evidence and assurance that things are being delivered as they should be delivered. Okay, so let's talk about the next part. So, internal operations outcomes. Okay, so an example of this is clearly in terms of what the instances risk that that either the organisation faces or the risk that residents may face. That has to be reported. Make sure it's structured in a certain way that people actually, the board is able to understand, well, yes, I can assure myself that that part is actually being done. There's obviously then the consumer experience and feedback that you need from that. So make sure that, and this is interesting, I know that people do a lot of surveys, and I've got to say, quite a few residents and clients at the moment are saying, look, don't serve me anymore. I'm sick of you coming and asking me the questions. It is a bit of a quandary as far as how much is the right amount to survey. Can I suggest that you cut the survey up into various chunks? So you might do a survey on care, you might do a survey on food, you might do a survey on cleaning, you might do a survey and break it up. The other thing I find too is it's important that whoever does the survey must not have any skin in the game in terms of care and services with the particular residents or clients, because residents and clients are sometimes reluctant to tell someone who has skin in the game and is providing care, whatever, exactly how they feel. So it is really important that you have an independent person internally that that effectively is able to go and do those surveys, so the board gets as a clear picture as possible from them. Okay. And then there's obviously that feedback and any complaints. And the last part is, I think this is a result of the new standards and the new act, is I think you're going to need external validation. I think as a board member, if you're sitting there saying, yes, I'm getting good information, yes, I'm getting feedback, I'm getting the complaints and so on, but that's given by management. And I know management are all goodwill and so on, but there may be things that they miss. So I'm suggesting that as a board, you effectively need to say to management, we need to have this externally validated. Now, I do it here where I am at the moment as a CEO, but also have other clients who also do it as well. So someone externally comes in and reviews the systems and reviews the processes and actually checks to make sure that what's being reported to the board is factual and accurate.
That's wonderful,
Yep.
Mark. I think you summarised it well with, the governing body carries the can, and but it is our responsibility to support them with the accurate information, the coaching. We've got a few minutes just before you jump off, Mark. There's been a couple of questions come through in the chat, so I might just also read them out. Aaron, thanks for your comment. This is from Aaron Goldsworthy. Mark acknowledges your comment about there's no grace period, and the question is, what's your experience with how on time the Commission is conducting full reaccreditation using the old language in brackets? So, what's your experience with how the Commission's conducting on time reaccreditation?
In terms of on time, I mean, I think it's a little bit okay. There's a couple of points there, Aaron. One is that they will be on time, and of course now the re-registration is done as a provider level, and then the services are then fed underneath that. So it's sort of being done in two parts. So it is quite different to what it was before. However, that doesn't stop the Commission from reviewing at the service level. And that's where I think there's no grace periods, that if they come in and they see a risk for a particular service, and it happens to be connected to a larger provider, and there may be many services throughout that provider, then they'll start searching at the provider level. So it'll run up to the board at that point. I haven't got any experience of what on time at the moment, but I am meeting with the director, Scott Rumbold, next week, and we'll further question him about exactly what the process, because Scott's actually responsible for that side of the compliance and the re-registration. So yeah, I just caution people that if you have, say, 10 or 12 services that may be under the provider level, that if one of them gets triggered, that something they may not like or not see as being a risk, then the provider will then get then also probably investigate as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. That's brilliant. And we will have Mark back for the final webinar to hear how that meeting went, and all of the questions that you asked, Mark. We're going to be passing those on. Aaron, just acknowledging your comment, totally agree that in the media we've heard a little bit about the new standards are going from 8 to 7, but as you acknowledge, Mark, the subset and the actual new standards to meet may be lower in number, but the rigor is far greater. Got a question from Linda Watts. Linda's question was, how will the accreditors find the board members to ask them these questions? The board members won't be on site. What's your response?
Obviously, they'll be asked to meet with the board. So effectively, that 4-stage process I talked about, which the first stage was actually notifying you that your reaccreditation is coming or re-registration is coming up. And effectively, you then move to the next stage saying, give us all this information. And then they'll say, we will be there. So the sort of, basically, the new world is no unannounced visits as such. So you will know well in advance, and this is similar to what has been done in home care for a number of years. The current home care process is, hey, we want to audit you, or we want to check you. Here's a list of questions. Please send us information, and we're going to turn up next week to talk to you. And I think effectively what you're going to have to do is when the commission effectively says to you, well, this is when we're going to turn up, you're going to have to marshal the board together to come. It would not be a good look if the board didn't turn up or
That's right.
didn't turn up.
Absolutely.
So I think that's something which, and that's again what they're expecting is the governing body must take a much more active role in the service now than probably what they've ever done before.
Yeah, agree. Just a comment from Aaron, thank you. When you talk about, Mark, that the governing body will need to know what systems are provided, for HR and care minutes, a comment from Aaron that sounds like a great opportunity for a cheat sheet for directors. Yes, that comes into the coaching piece, I think, Aaron. The need to support the governing body with these types of tools and resources is essential. A question here from Nicole Earl. Next, Mark. Nicole's question is, as a small family business with no stakeholders and stockholders, do we need a governing body?
Yes. Yes, there has to be somebody who's accountable, and actually doing a number of applications for new providers. It's something which the commission is absolutely hard and fast on, is that whilst you can have, say, a company that just has one director and that's who they are, you do need to have an overall governing body, I'm afraid. So if it's a small family business, then in that case, it may be mum and dad and children, I don't know, but whoever it is has to basically make up that governing board, because they will be held responsible as such. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Comment from Catherine. That sounds wonderful. Catherine's put a document together that has all of the questions that the boards will be asked, which they generated from the digital guidance tool, and that's used to support or coach board members. Excellent. That's very similar to what we've got in the audit readiness tool, where you can see across the 21 themes literally the questions that the governing body will be asked across those themes. So that's excellent. The need to coach and support boards is very evident. Great idea. I'll try and pick one further question. I think you'll love this question, Mark, from Alistair Croydon. The question or the comment is, the challenge in all of this is the inconsistency of the approach of the commission. We've not had a visit since our accreditation in September 2022. Any comment or response to that one, Mark?
Okay, I'm going to do a most unusual thing now, and I'm going to actually praise the commission because the material that the commission has put out, particularly in terms of the evidence that they require, I think stops some of the nonsense that's gone on in the past. And I talk that from a personal point of view and talking to many of my clients. You have what I would call a rogue assessor turn up and start asking for ridiculous type stuff. And you think, oh my God, what's that got to do with it? So I think what the commission, in terms of putting out effectively that evidence mapping tool, they've done a brilliant job, because now when the assessors come, you say, well, I have the evidence mapping tool. I know what evidence you want. This is what I've got. Okay. And then you can argue that point in terms of that. Look, the other point of that too is, and I know the commission dearly love me for this, but I don't take any nonsense. No nonsense from the commission. And if a particular assessor starts playing up and starts asking for a ridiculous thing, then I'm basically on the phone to the commission saying, well, do something about them. I'm sorry. When they arrive, they should be respectful. They shouldn't be devious, and I've had devious ones in the past as such. I've also had some brilliant ones. I mean, the last lot that came here nearly 18 months ago were absolutely brilliant, but the mob before that were terrible. So I'm saying to everybody, and probably your commission people listening to this as well, is I think the commission's actually come a long way in the last 12, 18 months. and I think they are generally interested in partnering with providers to make sure that good care, because they keep hammering us all the time about, oh, you didn't do this. And, I had one example where a client in New South Wales where the particular person from the residential facility went out every morning to get his cup of coffee, and the assessors want a risk analysis done every morning, which is just ridiculous. Like, what was this, some sort of jail or something? And the provider pushed back on it, and eventually the assessor backed down. But asking those silly sort of stuff I think is gone. I don't see that in this new world. The commission's there is to basically monitor and make sure things are right, but not to come up with sort of stuff in the past. So I'm hoping that that will be the new world.
Here's hoping too. Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate your response to those questions there. There's a couple of sections left to go, but if you do have any further questions, please continue to pop them in the chat. We'll do our best to get through them today. If not, we'll take them away and make sure that we include a response. Wonderful. And Mark will continue to join us for the rest of the session. So feel free, Mark, to pop any answers that you want to respond to in as well. Okay, so next, I'll just bring our slides back on. Beautiful. Next up, I just want to really briefly touch on the board responsibilities under the new Act. And I know that sounds crazy. How could we just briefly touch on it? Because as you would all be aware, they are significant. The main message, I guess, I've got two main messages. The first main message that I guess I want to make is that this really is the opportunity to align a rights-based approach with your governance. So, I'm speaking high level here, but what we want to encourage you to think of is that board responsibilities, as you've heard, the level of detail and engagement that the Commission expects really shows that they go now above and beyond compliance. These responsibilities really are about leadership, assurance, and safeguarding people's rights. There are specific responsibilities now around quality of care, consumer experience, workforce capability, clinical oversight. And of course, a key element of the Act is the Statement of Rights, which replaces the Charter of Rights. It is essential that you are getting training and education and support out to your board. That is imperative. We are seeing a lot of organisations at the moment assigning training or training plans out to boards on the new Act. There's just a couple of resources. They're short. We know that these people, we know you are busy. We know that there is a lot to get through, a lot to absorb. But really starting from that first principles, what basic knowledge around the Act, rights-based care is essential. So if you haven't already, really consider working with your governing body to start assigning support and training. We've also been working on creating a lot of relevant toolbox content. So this is free. We'll pop the link up to the toolbox in a moment. These are articles that you can share with your board and governing body. Mark is a fabulous contributor, as is Karen. We really are aware that there is so much to cover. Trying to provide that in one or two webinars is challenging, but encourage you to make the most of these other resources there. If you have a look at some of the topics here, impact of the new aged care reforms on board decisions. There's some case studies really looking in more detail about responsible person duty and so forth. So if you haven't already, really encourage you to subscribe to the toolbox. It's one email a week and we try and pop as much relevant information in there. But as I said, key message is really ensure that as part of this big coaching and preparation piece that we are actually supporting boards and governing bodies with the relevant information and education. Okay, what I want to move to now is what I mentioned at the start. And of course, we know that compliance is important. What I hope that you've got so far is some of those really practical suggestions from Mark on getting ready to be compliant and show compliance. But it is also an opportunity to reframe governance from being a compliance responsibility to an opportunity to build capability. So Karen, our Chief Nursing Officer, obviously has tremendous experience. She's been an executive health service leader and as I said at the start, a fellow of the Australasian College of Health Service Managers and has sat on many boards. So I really draw on her experience here. She developed this content. I just am the lucky one that gets to present on her behalf while she's away. But her core message is that governance isn't just a compliance function. It is a leadership system. And that system is what shapes how care is provided, supported, and improved. Further to that, board and executive oversight really needs to be positioned as active infrastructure for our person-centred care. It is not a static set of documents. This is a living system, and thinking conceptually about the role of board and executive in that manner really is critical. So, encouraging to shift from, what compliance looks like on paper to, yes, we've met that, yes, we have that, to the lived experience of assurance. So that's where, as Mark talked about, the outcomes for consumers and our workforce, they are what the evidence for good governance is, not passing an audit. And you can hear, we are moving towards an outcomes-based model of care, an outcomes-based assessment. So really starting from those outcomes, that is critical. That is where success is. Karen really wanted to emphasize that, the board and executive leadership, you are stewards of culture, not just controllers of risk, but you are stewards of culture relating to safety, to trust, and workforce capability. So this is critical. Your role is a critical one right now. Examples of what evidence might look like beyond documents to say this is what we're doing and we're doing a good job. Are real-time workforce feedback loops. Mark talked about, your committees bringing in the individual to the service design and review. Really knowing that the clinical incident trends and reviews are reaching the board. That at every meeting, those data points are getting to the board, and that's a critical piece to note on their agenda. Also, thinking about audit readiness isn't a task. Yes, there is a huge amount of work to do to get ready for an audit, and we know that is important. We know that much time has to be spent getting ready for an audit. But just know that the product of a well-governed, transparent system is that you get to that audit. So to Mark's point, tools and best practices that will help get you ready for this are those reportings, those systems thinking about how do the roles, responsibilities, and reporting lines that you already have create governance. We really want to use this opportunity to show that there are strong links between workforce capability and governance. Coming back to the expectations around Standard 2 means that it is critical that boards do understand the workforce skill mix. That when they're asked about what system is in place for learning and development, that they know that answer. And that psychological safety really is present within the organisation. This is the critical way that workforce capability and governance relate. So how can you actually do this? What we'd encourage is in board meetings that governing bodies are actually interrogating this data that we're bringing. That is this actually a governance issue? Are trends in staff turnover or incident reports or quality indicators, to dive deeper and actually think, is this a governance issue? Not just surface level, this is the information that I've got, but is this a governance issue? And can we do more to support the system underpinning this rather than just responding or reacting to the data point? So I'm whizzing through a little bit because I want to have a bit more time at the end for any questions that might have come up. But I did want to spend the last couple of minutes just sharing a tool and some tips that to take these approaches from Mark and Karen to really support your boards to get ready for an audit and to view this opportunity through that capability rather than just a compliance lens. So what Karen's done for us is develop a maturity matrix for audit readiness. I guess you can think of it as a self-assessment tool. We'll pop the resource in the email that we send out with the recording. But what it is a PDF to help you assess maturity across 6 domains. And this really does align with the whole of organizational approach and really towards that person-centered leadership. So what you'll see in the PDF are 6 domains, and there is a key governance question across each of these 6 domains. So the 6 domains being vision and values, board oversight, workforce capability, consumer experience, quality and safety culture, and audit readiness. So across the 6 domains, you've got a question, and then you as a board and a governing body can reflect on your maturity level. And there's 4 maturity levels in this matrix. I'll show you a picture in a moment. Level 1, foundational. Level 2, emerging. 3, embedded. And 4, leading. Apologies for the typo here. So what we're encouraging you to do is use this tool within the board as a discussion. So when you're going through an internal governance review, you can use this matrix to identify what is your current maturity level in each of the domains, and then set improvement targets as part of your governance development or audit preparation. So if I look at one of the examples, a key governance question across the domain of vision and values is our commitment to dignity, safety, and person-centered care embedded in our strategy and operations? And as a team, you would reflect on what level of maturity are we at with regards to that question. Another question, if you take workforce capability as a domain, how do we know that staff are supported, skilled, and safe to deliver care every single day? If we look at a quality and safety culture, there's an opportunity to reflect on, are we fostering a speak up culture and continuous improvement? So we really encourage you to try and take this practical tool, use it as part of an internal review, use it as a readiness tool to support your board, your governing body, to really work through those maturity levels, set a target, and then apply the initiatives that you're working on to get to that leading state. We'll pop the link in the chat, but you can scan the QR code to get your copy of it. And as I mentioned, we'll include it in the email that we send out with the recording. Okay, a couple of practical quick wins to finish off with. Hopefully the message is clear. We really encourage you to assign education to your board, education training, as you would with any other target audience. They need our support too, and there are some fabulous resources that we can share with them. As part of your readiness, really consider doing a governance review or a self-assessment. Internal audits really can be powerful before that external audit occurs. I know there were a couple of comments in the chat about the feasibility of bringing an external provider in. Yes, that's helpful, but you can also conduct a mock audit internally, and that might be a way that you can address that in a cost feasible way for you. And use this tool to reflect on governance maturity and the audit readiness. They're designed, so this tool plus the audit readiness tool, they're designed for self-assessment to help you reflect on where you are at versus where you need to be, to really then assign accountability and have a clear plan for the work that lies ahead. A couple of final points. If you've seen any of the articles on the toolbox that I've written, you know I really try and emphasize that language really matters. This is a compliance piece, but there is so much more that the new standards bring. They're an opportunity, and even in our language, opting for values-based or people-centered governance really does frame this from just another box that we have to tick. If we really want to bring the person into these discussions, there's some really simple ways that we can start asking questions as a governing body. Rather than, have you got a policy on this, or tell me about that, how would you know that our systems support dignity and safety every day? Really understanding that we're here to support our workforce, and asking those questions empathetically, and acknowledging complexity. I think as a governing body, when you're working closely with your management and executive team, acknowledge that it is tough. There is a lot involved, and there is this tension between, that meat in the sandwich, what I'm doing with my team operationally on the ground, and then how I need to support you as a governing body. So just acknowledging this complexity, I think, builds trust, and goes to the heart of workforce capability. Okay, we are almost there. It's June 3rd today. We have our final webinar in the series on July 1st, would you believe? We will have Mark back after his in-depth discussion with the Commission next week, so he'll have lots of pearls to share with us. The purpose of our final webinar is to talk about two things: reporting and coaching, to really make sure that your workforce knows how to respond to some of those questions, as we've gone through the importance of that with the governing body today. And then your role, when you're actually needing to bring up those reports, what does that look like? So I'll quickly pop the link on the slide for this webinar. If you haven't already registered, please do so. We'd love to see you there, but there are a couple of minutes left, so we might bring Mark back up on the stage for any final questions. I'll have a look in the chat to make sure that we can use the time wisely and get to them. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Beautiful. All right, I'll just have a look at the chat. Okay. Mark, are there any particular new areas in the strengthened standards that you see that will be challenging? I think you mentioned standard 6 nutrition as one. What are your thoughts on this one? Thanks again, Aaron, for your question.
Yeah, look, I think it's I think for home care, it's going to be the clinical area and clinical safety. I think it's going to be the major issue for home care. For residential care, it's going to be effectively standards 6 and 7. Okay, I've interviewed thousands of residents across Australia, and they always talk about 5 things, and the 5 things is food, activities, food, laundry, and food. Okay, so the really tough one's going to be and activities. I mean, laundry one is, why is my mother's jumper, a third of the size it used to be? But that's just a practical issue. But honestly, food is just something which is front of mind, and I think a lot of providers are going to struggle to, particularly in terms of the dining experience, in terms of being able to cater for each of the person's individual food needs, and you're not necessarily going to be able to satisfy them all the time. So I think that's a real struggle. And the other one is obviously activities and that whole area of engagement of the person in the social world, as opposed to residential care, as opposed to just a clinical care.
Thanks, Mark, for your response there. I just want to understand, with the comment about standard 5 clinical care being a really tough one for home care, when we did our initial gap analysis, the education and training requirements that come from standard 5 are huge. What's your advice to home care providers with regards to meeting standard 5 clinical care?
I think the main thing is that you have good clinical oversight. I mean, one of the issues with home care is there's not a lot of clinical services outside of, say, allied health or OTs or podiatrists. There's not a lot of nursing care. There's not a lot of ENs or whatever is carried out, because often their medical needs are met by their doctor or whatever. So it is going to be a real challenge, as people are supposed to be kept at home longer and longer, that their clinical needs are going to increase. So the main thing is that you have good clinical oversight. And I think that's the area that I know that some providers struggle in terms of making sure that, particularly if they outsource their nurses, which a lot of home care providers do, then how do you make sure that that delivery of care, clinical care, is best practice? That's going to be the issue.
Fantastic. I agree. Couple of final questions. Louise Hargrave asks, are the QI for home care support at home, have they been released yet? If so, do you know when they will be?
No, I'm not aware of them at the moment, but they won't be dissimilar to some of the residential ones, which obviously will be falls, pressure injuries, medication errors, things like that. So although I have had a bit of a win on restricted practices, I don't think it does apply in home care. And I've had a good argument with the Commission in the Administrative Appeals Tribunal on that one, and the Commission's backed down because I think it's very hard to, how do you have restricted practices in someone's home? I mean, it's just, you can't lock them in a home, you can't tie them up, you know, so whereas in residential care, there is a real issue in terms of restricted practices, so yeah.
Fabulous, thanks Mark. And final question from Catherine, I think it may be one that we point to the audit readiness tool. How do you see the Commission confirming with older people that their care and services is being delivered in accordance with the new Statement of Rights? I guess I'd refer to the audit readiness tool where one of the evidence categories is from individuals, both in surveys, but during an audit, the Commission, the auditors can and will actually directly ask individuals and their families specific questions. So that's my response, Mark. Have I interpreted that correctly?
Yeah, no, same. There'll be the external, obviously external surveys which are done. They'll rely on those, and those appear on the star ratings. The other ones, whatever internal ones you've done, and then obviously interviewing them when they come, which has been a practice for the last few years in terms of when the audits have been carried out.
Fabulous. All right, thank you very much for your participation, everyone, and a huge thanks to yourself, Mark. We appreciate and always enjoy having you on these webinars, and really looking forward to the final webinar of the series where we'll hear from Mark again, and really look forward to moving from talking about July 1 to actually knowing
being in July 1
is here, and we can have a little party at the end of that webinar to say well done for everyone's hard work getting there. So thanks everyone for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks everyone. Okay, take care.